all 10 games that we are discussing today will fall into one of two, I guess, supposed categories. Category 1 being, here is a type of game that I know you like, so here's another one. And then category 2 is, here is a game that I like, and I hope that you can play it and you can understand why I enjoy it. Maybe even you yourself will also enjoy it. Which is where I imagine that quite a few of these games are gonna fall into both categories. I'm thinking of it as like one of those diagrams with the two circles, and there's that like third small category in the center of the diagram.
Yeah, we're talking about the Venn diagram, right?
There we go, Venn diagram. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotcha. Because to be honest, I do feel like almost like every one of these games could potentially fit into that middle section, but I can certainly see like how they would be, you know, different enough that they could fit into like just one or the second category. And I'm kind of nervous to be honest about the categories and like whether or not these are games that like you'll either end up playing or you'll even be interested in it. But I mean, we'll see, right?
Well, that's part of today's discussion. Hopefully, I can convince you to try something new. So, before we begin, let's do a small prediction game. Let's predict what each other's recommendations are. I guess I'll go first. As an example, I am going to predict that your recommendations for me are Bayonetta, Resident Evil 4, Shadow of the Colossus, Dragon Age Origins, and Journey.
Really no.
Yes.
I thought okay, good, 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 good. Slow down, dude. I legitimately thought you were just going to, say generalizations of genres that I would be recommending you to, not games specifically. Like, that is incredibly specific.
Yeah.
Like, damn, okay.
Yes, we are currently in an age where the video game landscape it's an entire ocean. There are thousands of games to choose from. Let's try to find the needles in the haystack.
You kind of left me a little bit speechless with at least a couple of the titles that you predict are going to be in my list. And I'm tempted to tell you whether or not they are on
Well,
here.
okay. Well, we will eventually find out, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
But also, go ahead. What do you predict that I am going to recommend you?
I'm going to be completely honest with you, dude. I don't know. And here's why. Because ever since like you and I first started talking, like basically the initial stages of our friendship, the stuff that you recommended me were genres that I had never ever touched before, of series that I had never even heard of before. So for me to kind of make predictions on, what specific games I think you're going to end up recommending me is more difficult because I there's entire series out there that I have not been exposed to. And somehow I get the feeling that you would probably end up choosing one of them. But if I absolutely had to pick at least one series, not specific game, but at least a series that might end up being on your list, there is a big, big, big part of me that wants to say, at the very least, Xenoblade. Maybe a title from like the Legend of Zelda series. But my gut instinct kind of tells me Xenoblade.
Okay, so to make this a bit easier for you, would you rather make 5 predictions of entire game series that I would want you to try?
Possibly. I already listed two.
Okay, so Xenoblade and Legend of Zelda.
Mm-hmm. Probably something in. I'm thinking of. I'm thinking very specifically of a couple of games in the Mario franchise that you have told me about before, and you've even shown me before, very incredibly briefly, but that's also another one that comes to mind. Um, there's a part of me that also kind of feels like you would want to maybe say like the Tales games, like the Tales of Berseria, Arise, that series.
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, oh my goodness. The last one is probably gonna be some. Okay, I don't know why. This is a little bit of a joke one, but I can kind of see you kind of like making this recommendation to me. Uh, I guess you could just factor in this as like a silly answer just because I'm silly, I suppose. But I was kind of thinking the Power Wash Simulator.
Um, okay. Okay, so your predict.
I'm half joking. I'm half joking because I do genuinely think that you would think that I should try it out, but at the same time it's like one of those titles it's like it's kind of a joke, but also not because it just looks incredibly satisfying to play, honestly.
Alright, so your 5 predictions are Xenoblade, Zelda, Mario, Tales of, and Power Wash Simulator.
Look, when you say it out like that, I already feel very very silly for it, but yeah, like that's low key my predictions.
Well, on paper, one of these is far from the other 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, you've introduced me to stuff in the past that I probably never would have tried before if it wasn't for you vouching for it, you know? So I kind of have to make wild guesses regardless. And that's kind of like what puts me at a little bit of a disadvantage is because you're so much more well-rounded than I am.
Because I play too many games of different genres.
And I like that you introduced me to different genres and whether or not I actually take to them, that's a whole other story, but, like, I wanna say that almost every time you tend to, like, actually convince me to at least give them a chance and try them out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, I guess we shall proceed and find out how accurate were our predictions.
How accurate do you think you are?
With my predictions, oh, like I said, I'm looking for needles in a haystack. I'm gonna say at the very least, I got maybe. I got maybe 1 out of 5. Otherwise, there is a very high likelihood all 5 of those predictions are just wrong.
I was kind of convinced you were gonna say all 5 predictions are true. Imagine that. You know me really well.
Yes, exactly. If I somehow got all 5 of them, then yeah, I do know you too well. Welcome to our relationship. Ladies first, or shall I?
You do the honors. Go
Okay.
right on ahead.
Okay. So, very quick side question. Your 5 recommendations, did you treat them as like a top 5 kind of list? Going from like 5 to number 1 being, oh, an absolute?
No, I did not.
Okay, fair enough. So I tried to not do that. And yet, I will admit, my I guess quote unquote number 5 was very difficult because I had like 7 different nominees. And ultimately, I did settle for one, and it is purely recency bias. And it's a game that I'm actually still currently playing right now, and that is Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh my goodness. Really now? Oh my gosh.
I went into Ghost of Tsushima expecting a good game, a like 8 out of 10. I wasn't expecting something absolutely spectacular, just something good. And it was so much better than I initially thought. And for me, the two big reasons are number one, the cinematography. You can tell that these people really loved samurai films and even like anime and manga, which depending on said anime and manga, yeah, they take inspiration also from very old vintage Japanese films. So there are just certain camera shots and cinematics that just look so good. I understand why this game is now officially getting an anime adaptation. I wouldn't be surprised if it did get a live film adaptation at some point.
Oh, let me stop you right there. When did this news come out that it was getting an anime adaptation?
Like weeks ago.
Oh my god. I didn't know that. What? What? Seriously?
I posted that in the
Holy
Discord.
crap. Oh my god. Oh, this is gonna be sick. Oh, I can't wait to see that. No, but I want to play the game first though. Or should I watch it? No, no, no. I want to play the game first before I see the anime. I want to have like a I want to see whether or not it's a proper adaptation. Because if I
Exactly.
were to do it backward, then yeah, I don't think it would translate very well. Um, I guess my overall judgment. Uh, I have to judge the source material first before I see what the adaptation brings to the table.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
Dude, a freaking anime! Oh, that's gonna be wonderful. And to kind of respond to your recommendation of Ghost of Tsushima to me, here's the thing, because I technically own the PS4 and now the PS5 version of it, I think it's the definitive one?
The
Yeah,
director's
the Game of
cut.
the Year one? There we go, that one.
Okay, well,
And the thing is,
speaking of Game of the Year, I did a quick Google search because I was curious. Wait, what year did Ghost of Tsushima come out? 2020. And what was Game of the Year in
yes.
2020? Last of Us 2.
Yeah, that is an incredibly contentious year for Game of the Year because the player's voice almost, it seems like it seemed rather unanimous that like Ghost of Tsushima should have won Game of the Year. But for whatever reason, the Game Awards decided to give it over to The Last of Us Part 2, which was easily the most contentious and divisive game of that year.
I remember in 2020 I was saying Hades, and it was a nominee. And now that I'm playing through Ghost of Tsushima, I think I'm swapping my vote. Nah, it should have been Ghost of Tsushima. Sorry, Hades. You're great, but I went in with middle expectations and they were blown way out of the water.
I want you to imagine me having like the absolute like most mind blown expression right now when you say that. I know just how high regard you hold Hades. You've been recommending that game to me. You and several of my other friends too have been recommending me to play that game since it basically came out.
Mm-hmm.
It just colored me insanely surprised, like, just, like, the mind blown, facial expression right now, like, I really cannot believe that you of all people would tell me that now you're softening your stance on Hades being Game of the Year to now Ghost of Tsushima being Game of the Year, because I know just how much in high regard you hold Hades. This is mind-blowing, dude. I am legitimately insanely curious. Like you're like I can see Ghost of Tsushima is actively making its way up and up and up my backlog to where now I have to play it sooner rather than later.
Well, especially with the anime eventually gonna be coming out.
Yeah, definitely. No, seriously, dude, this is one hell of a surprise and a very good one too. I don't think I was expecting this.
And allow me to pique your interest a bit more. The second thing about Ghost of Tsushima for me is the story so far. And I'll just give you the premise. You are playing as a samurai, and throughout his journey, time and time again, he is essentially put into situations where this idea of honor, facing your enemies directly, is actually more of a hindrance than being a stealthy assassin, which is why it's called Ghost of Tsushima. Or at least that's just one more reason why it's called Ghost of Tsushima. So everything that he's taught from youth to now in adulthood, he is being tested. And a lot of the times it seems to be easier to attack your foes from the shadows rather than facing on head forward. And that also does translate to the gameplay, where, yeah, you can go in Conan the Barbarian style, or you can play Assassin's Creed.
Funny that you should bring that up with Assassin's Creed Shadows being delayed. And people basically saying, why bother? Ghost of Tsushima exists.
Yeah, and we're about to get Ghost of Yotei too.
And just correct me if I'm wrong, but just based off of like the trailers, it's the very first Mongol invasion of Japan, correct?
I don't know about the very first, because as much as I want to look up how historically accurate Ghost of Tsushima is, I am worried that it is going to lead to some spoilers.
Ah, okay. So you want to.
So I'm not
Mhm.
looking into it just yet. The most the not so spoiler part that I did find is the samurai armor in this time period is not accurate. And I think that was a creative decision, maybe for marketing. The armor we see in Ghost of Tsushima, it is in line to what we typically see as the traditional samurai armor here in the West. And I guess the historically accurate armor of that time period, there was a bit more furs and leathers involved.
Oh, really? I did not know that. That's a fun fact of trivia.
So yes, please play Ghost of Tsushima. I want to watch you watch it. I want to watch you play it on stream.
That is a promise. I promise you.
Yes.
I will play it there. Hold me accountable to it, okay?
Okay, but then again, I'm looking at my list, and yeah, no, I kind of would want to watch all you play all five of these on stream.
Oh, that makes me look forward to the rest of your entries, dude. By far. That makes me look forward to that.
So that is I guess, my quote unquote number five. So let's move on to at least one of
Yeah.
your recommendations.
And this is kind of, I guess, also leaning into how I do my list. Like, I, I tried kind of my best to look for games that either you have not heard of before, you've never played before, or it's not already in your wish list. But considering how expansive your Steam wish list is, I get the feeling that at some point it's very likely that these games are on there anyways, but my mindset was if they are, I want to try to do my best to kind of convince you to play them sooner rather than later. Because I absolutely did not treat this as like a top 1 through 5 games. Like I'm just like, looking for ones that could potentially interest you and I'll see if maybe I can convince you to play them like sooner.
I guess I'll add some clarification on my end. Uh,
Hmm.
so I guess my quote unquote number five goes to Tsushima. That's only number five because the other four were like deadlocked. I knew absolutely for sure I was gonna recommend these no matter what. My number five was
Aw.
my number five had like seven different competitors, and then I just settled for Ghost of Tsushima. And I would say my quote unquote number one is yes, no, please, 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 please play this.
Oh my god. Bro, you're still hyping me up with this, aren't you? Good golly. I love the way you do it.
Okay.
This is great. No, seriously. Um, when we get to the end of this, you better tell me what the other ones were. Or at least I hope you will.
Oh, my nominees for number 5 that fell
Yeah.
under Ghost? Oh, okay, yeah, I can do that.
If you'd like. Otherwise, if you want to keep that like, as a surprise, by all means, that's okay too. I'm just really curious because you said that the other four were deadlocked and this one was a contender.
Mm hmm.
A a contender amongst many, it would seem.
Yes. But go
So,
ahead.
yeah, for my number one game, I would kind of put this a little bit into like more so like the category of like, like I have an idea of the games that you like, and here's potentially another one. And I do believe this game is already on your list, and we've talked about it a little bit in the past. But my first game that I would have recommended is Fury.
Theory.
Hmm.
This
So,
sounds new to me.
really, I could have sworn that we talked about it at least a couple of times. It's not really a game that I really wanted to like talk too much about because I wanted you to be kind of like surprised when you see it. But to kind of preface this, this is a game that I played like a long, 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 long time ago on stream. This is like one of those like experimental titles that I had no idea whether or not people would even like it. It was more so just a title for me to kind of like play for the first time, and I did it on stream. And let me tell you, I personally enjoyed the heck out of it. I love it to death. It's, a hack and slash, it's a shoot 'em up game that just it's so effective at making you feel like every single boss that you are fighting just ends up feeling like a final boss. Every one of them. And what I in particular loved about this game, and this was kind of something that I immediately noticed off the bat, even before I started playing this for myself, and this was like when I saw my brother play it a little bit when he was trying it out for the first time. What I loved so much about this game was the soundtrack. In my honest opinion, this was legitimately the absolute main draw to this game for me. And like everything else about it just falls into place as like just, positive add-ons to like this overall insanely enjoyable experience. Dear God, dude, like I don't even know how to properly describe it, but it definitely falls into that category of like retro synthwave, music. And I love that genre to death. And the way that this soundtrack is basically composed by like I think it was like about somewhere in the range of like 4 to 7 artists. Like these 4 to 7 artists were commissioned to do like either 1 to 2 songs each, and they all put it into a soundtrack for this game. And every one of them has such an insanely different style that fits each of these boss fights, but it is just so good. It just Oh my God, I don't know how to describe it. Like it's the kind of music that just hypes you up, and it just keeps pushing you to continue going through with these boss fights because these fights are insanely difficult. And no matter how hard they got, I kind of knew that I could never truly be that angry with it because in the end, I was just enjoying the crap out of the music because it's like I'm having the time of my life, and yet I'm still getting my butt kicked. I was perfectly fine with it. I loved it that much.
I've heard similar sentiments with Celeste, the platformer. Yeah, that game is incredibly difficult, but the reason why you tend to not be frustrated is just because of how relaxing the music is.
Well, let me tell you, like it kind of has a similar effect in the sense that, like, you're not that bothered by, how much trial and error you end up going through this game. It's just the music that, like, keeps you going. Like, that effect, absolutely. But where Celeste is what you described, like that relaxing music, this one is just intense. It's a rave. Like, it's on the other side of the spectrum for it. Um,
The only comparison I can think of, and I don't know how accurate of a comparison this is, would be like Fury,
Wait, for which one?
the game Fury. You streamed it.
Yeah, exactly, that one.
Oh, is that a good comparison or not?
That is the game I'm talking about.
Wait. So, wait, are you saying that Fury is also by the same team that is Theory?
The Game Bakers, I believe. The Game
Oh,
Bakers is, I believe, the name of the development studio for Fury.
okay, that makes much more sense now.
You thought I was talking about another game, correct?
Yeah,
Because that's the kind of like the sentiment. No, I was talking about Fury. And yes, that is a game that you and I have talked about at least a couple of times in the past. I do remember that.
I swear it sounded like you said Theory.
I wouldn't even know what the heck Theory is, bro.
Yeah, no, I thought when you named the game, I thought you just said Theory, Theory. I'm like, okay, that's why I said I don't think I've ever heard of this.
But now that you know what I'm actually talking about, you
Okay,
do know,
yes,
correct?
okay, this changes everything.
I think it just, puts a little bit more into perspective as to like you probably know what I'm talking about when it comes to the music. I
Oh
don't know if
yes,
you've told me that you've listened to it, but you know what I mean, right? That music just eggs you on to keep going through
yes,
every single fight, and you cannot be pissed off about how much trial and error because the music is just that damn good. That's
yes,
why I love it. That's the main reason why I love it. Like, oh my God. Like I said, everything else, like all of the other like components to this game are just positive add-ons. Like the music is what does it for me. But if I had to list, or rather if I had to talk about like at least a couple of things that I think this game handles incredibly well, like the story, I'm rather surprised at how simple the story is. But the way that you are presented the story by, how they tell you of like the sequence of events that led to your character's capture, the current circumstances that you are in, the progression of like your escape, and as well as like talking about the people who captured you, which is essentially like all the bosses that you end up fighting. It's just it's like a wonderful presentation because it's all narrated to you by the game's like narrator character. And this narrator character, their motivations and their unique perspectives on these bosses has a really good ability to rather influence how you, the player and the character, ought to feel towards people who locked you up, the bosses that you have to fight. It's kind of like essentially driving your emotions, your determination towards your freedom. But then when you actually meet said bosses, when you actually get into the cutscenes that open up to the fights themselves, like they can either like taunt you, or they can offer up like kind of vague ideas as to why you were locked up in the first place, or just outright make you question whether or not breaking out of prison is a good idea. These are, I want to say, at least a couple of aspects that make this game so powerfully memorable. Like, even after years since the last time that I played, I can still kind of hear that narration dialogue and how expertly crafted and narrated, like the voice acting execution of this was so freaking good. It still kind of haunts me. It kept me engaged all throughout like the actual playing experience, and it still sticks with me to this day. And not many short games have been able to do that for me, which is why I think if you were to actually go through and play it all the way, it's likely it'll end up leaving that same experience with you. At least that's what I am hoping it will leave you with, as I recommend you play this game. Like for real, like all the way through to the end.
I mean, well, that is the goal for all of our recommendations for today.
Exactly. I'm keeping my fingers crossed on this one because you may have heard the soundtrack, but you haven't seen it in action.
I mean, I remember you streaming it, and I've listened to one of the tracks before. In fact, I used one track for one of my earliest videos that back when I was uploading Pokemon Emerald videos, but I do not remember which one off the top of my head.
I'm probably gonna like out of curiosity, I'll probably like look back to see which song it was. But that'll be something like if I get around to it, like I'll tell you whether or not I can actually identify which boss this song goes to. I've pretty much like memorized the soundtrack to that point. It's so damn good.
I'll take your word on it.
And with that comes your next game.
Okay. If anything, this is a game I enjoy, and I hope you also find some enjoyment in it. TCG Card Shop Simulator. And I am just thinking back to many years ago when we were young and youthful. And you were one of the few Takis merchants on the school campus.
Oh my god. You remember that?
Yes,
Oh my god.
I remember there was one kid who came up and asked me, "Hey, do you know who sells Takis?" And I pointed him to you.
Oh my goodness. I swear, no, if it wasn't for that, nobody would remember who I was in high school. Nobody. High school and middle school, actually. That was literally how people could identify me. That was it. The fact that you still remember that, oh my goodness.
Very much. So
Oh man,
Card Shop Simulator is one of those life slash job simulators, but I would like to call it a capitalism or money making simulator. So, I mean, I don't know how big you are when it comes to trading cards. I definitely am. I still have a somewhat lingering passion for Yu-Gi-Oh, despite how chaotic and brutal modern Yu-Gi-Oh is. I still have a appreciation for Pokemon trading cards. I never got into Magic, but I will say, since Magic is going to have a collaboration with Final Fantasy in the summer, I have a reason to get invested. Regardless if it's trading cards or some other job simulator, I think the idea of playing a game where the idea is to gain money through some kind of, I guess, blue collar labor is something that you would be able to relate to.
yes. Yes, I would. And okay, I'm gonna say this. The fact that you did recommend me a simulator game, one of my guesses at least was not that far off. Still same genre, but not that far off. Even if it wasn't exactly it. Yay!
One of your Power Wash Simulator prediction was not entirely off. Because even Power Watch Simulator would fall under that job simulator category, or I guess genre.
It's the interesting thing though, because I know that you have been playing the card one. I know that you also got into the tavern one. I don't remember if you got into I think it was just like the regular like supermarket simulator. I think that was more so one of my friends that was streaming it and I was just kind of like watching it being like you're playing a game about being a shop owner.
Yes, Card Shop Simulator is the same thing. You are you are the
Yeah, but
shop.
at least it's a card shop.
Well, yes.
Which is it's okay, it's more interesting than just being a regular supermarket owner. And so is the tavern one. So
Yeah, and
go
well,
ahead.
the tavern one is set in high fantasy.
I'm sorry, I'm still riding on the high of the fact that, like, I managed to predict a simulator one. I just didn't know if it was gonna be this one in particular, and I I'm actually kinda happy that you recommended me the card shop simulator because
Really?
I know yeah, 'cause I know that whenever you talked about how it's, like, a balance of very relaxing and you enjoy your time with it to also kind of a little bit frustrating and a little bit stressful just because it's like you have to make sure that you are actually making money on a day-to-day basis instead of spending more trying to acquire these cards and like having much more expenses in the end at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, no, cause
So,
I watched Twitch streamers play this game, and they legit developed a gambling addiction to the in-game cards. But thank God, it's simulated cards, simulated money, and said gambling addiction did not involve real money. Thank God.
yeah, I I agree with that. Thank goodness for that. Yay. But even so, like that's it's very surprising to be that invested like, to such a degree that they invest themselves in like the RNG of this.
Oh yeah, because like an actual card collector in real life, in this game, yeah, you can go if you do find any kind of cards, common, rare, whatever. You can choose to sell that individual card, or you could just keep it into your collection. You have a binder to store all your cards. It also acts like a, I guess, like a log or Pokedex. It's essentially just a single place to look at your collection as a player so you know which ones are missing. And because you can also decorate and configure your actual card shop, you can actually add display cases and show off your expensive cards to the customers. But as of right now, said customers do not make any particular comments about your amazing collection. Oh, by the way, this game is still in early access. I don't know how big or small the dev team is for this game, and I'm pretty sure as of right now, there's no plans to have the in-game customers comment on your collection.
I mean, whether or not that they add that particular feature in, it doesn't really seem to be like that integral to the overall experience because just by your enthusiasm and the way that you're describing it, like doesn't seem like that much of an important thing because the base game of what you have is already investing enough. So,
And also, both in-game and on the Steam page, they do have a roadmap of what they want to add. And at some point, they do want to make the actual card game itself playable. So you're not just a card shop, you can actually participate in the actual game. And honestly, I think that's the most ambitious one.
agreed. You're playing a game within a game.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know why, but that reminds me of Gwent with The Witcher.
Or Triple Triad.
Oh, yes. A card game that I just kind of wung it at every turn and somehow managed to succeed. I need to understand the rules for that one, I swear. I'll be able to enjoy it much more once I do. So, does this mean we shall move on to my next game to recommend you?
Go ahead.
This a little bit falls in line with a series that you're kind of a little bit on and off with, actually sitting down and playing through it at the moment. Um, it's kind of a little bit of like the similar vein as those games, but what I have been rather debating for a while as to include this on the list is Neo.
Damn it!
What?
I was considering that as one of my five predictions.
Ah!
It was either Neo or Journey, and I'm just thinking, okay, what's the one that? No, Neo just seemed a little, maybe a bit too obvious. What's the one she might surprise me with? Journey.
Are you kidding me? Okay, okay, okay. Look, in this game, or rather in this recommendation, I kind of would have felt the opposite. I think Journey would have been the one that would have been the most obvious, and Neo would have been the one that's like not that obvious.
No, it was the reverse for me.
For me, I feel like no, Journey was definitely on my list of contenders to recommend you. But I kind of felt like it would not have been such a good idea to recommend you Journey just because it's a game that like it almost feels like as if the whole world must have played it by now at some point. Like yes, it is an incredibly replayable experience and one that just like, really leaves you with the feels of just going on a journey and even like companionship, depending on whether or not you are able to play with somebody online, because the whole online component system of that game is just very it's a weird experience. I can't really like go too much into detail about it, but I felt like Journey was I genuinely felt like it would have been like the like way too much of an obvious recommendation for me to make to you. And for it to be the reverse in your mind, that's kind of interesting for me. Neo, I genuinely don't really want to compare it too much over to the Soulsborne series, and I think that the only reason for why people end up doing so is just because of the overall format of like the trial and error, the somewhat similarities in the combat, but most definitely in the aspect of when you die, you lose all of your currency. And if you die again before you're able to get that your loot back, then you lose everything. I think that that's probably the biggest reason for why people love to compare it over to the Soulsborne franchise. But there's quite a lot of features to Neo that differentiate it from Soft flagship franchise right now. And it kind of, to somewhat of a small degree, leans into the aspect of games that you're a little bit of a sucker for when it comes to like, creating builds. To somewhat of a degree, you can kind of do that here in Neo, more so than what you are able to do with like the Souls games, because Souls games, they're just straight up simple. Choose an attribute that you really want to level up, and you're able to choose the weapons that fall into that attribute, whether it be strength, dexterity, you want to be a magic user, you want to be a faith user, or whatever. Go ahead and put aspects into that. But with Neo, there's not really, they don't really concern themselves with attributes like that. It's more so the spirits that you decide to choose, like elementals that that you want to use in conjunction with the kind of weapons that you want to use for, fighting in this game, whether it be like the basic, katanas, whether it be like the freaking odachis, the tonfas, the kusarigamas. Like there's a variety of weapons that you can try out in this game, but it all depends on the items as well as the spirits that you decide to, have with you, like these special abilities that make the experience different from what people love to classify this as a Souls like.
Would you compare builds in Neo to builds that we see in Elden Ring?
No.
Okay.
And that's why I don't like when people say that this is a Souls-like, because in essence, it's really not. It's just one aspect of this game that people immediately think of, "Oh, that's what makes it a Souls-like." It's like, don't play this game because you think it's a Souls-like. Play it thinking that it is different, and you're gonna end up finding yourself in an experience that is probably a lot more engaging, like a lot more visually stunning with every combat encounter that you find yourself in, whether it be for the first game or even being for the second game, which is, to my knowledge, the second game being a little bit of a prequel sequel, but that also leads into a segment that is a sequel to the first game, if that makes sense.
Oh no, it does. There are way too many prequel sequels these days. Whether that be Red Dead 2, Devil May Cry 3, and then there's also Xenoblade 2, Torn of the Golden Country, which came out after the base game.
It's kind of like in that vein. I haven't had the chance to play the second game myself. It's up there on my backlog. I don't know when I'm gonna get to it, but I know I want to get to it because the amount of fun and the amount of time that I had personally invested into Neo 1, it was just an immersive experience. And not to mention the fact that like I'm already kind of a sucker for games that like take place within like medieval Japan. And this being like, I think it's like I don't know if it's like a retelling of one of like the very first English sailors who have made it over to Japan. Uh, Gosh, I forget what his historically accurate name was, but in Neo, I just know him as William. You know, like that blonde, blue-eyed English sailor that made his way over to Japan. I think it was for trading purposes, I believe, but
I'm vaguely familiar with the story. Yes.
yeah, like I'm not too caught up with like the actual real life events of it. It's just kind of like based on it, but not entirely historically accurate. So the overall setting of it being like in medieval Japan, and then you actually fighting like legitimately like, as close to accurate depictions of like various spirits and monsters within Japanese folklore. I thought that that was like the biggest draw for me. The story the story was, it was there. I wasn't really too invested in it at the time just because I was more concerned with like wanting to just get straight into the gameplay and seeing like, okay, like how does this game differentiate itself from any other Souls like, from any Soulsborne game in general. High stance, mid stance, low stance for like every single one of your weapons, and then having like the different elementals and different uh items, effects that you can, cast on either yourself or your enemies. It's great. It was a lot of fun. I genuinely enjoyed it. Um there were only like maybe a few times in which it got tedious, but that was only because like, trial and error. But aside from that, it was just an incredibly investing experience, and I am genuinely happy that it came as a PS Plus game, and I was just able to have instant access to it, and that's definitely a game that if I ever get the chance, I would like to actually like play it on stream so that I can show everybody else like, hey, I would like to recommend you all to this game because it's just that fun. I genuinely enjoyed it, and I hope that I was able to, convince you, and I don't know, maybe at some point in the future I'm able to convince more people to at least try it out. The fact that the game is a 2017 release and it still holds up really well, yeah, it's really good.
I will admit, I'm curious about these builds you mentioned.
Don't expect anything on the levels of like freaking Path of Exile, where if you wanted to be a necromancer, you can just summon the freaking dead, or if you wanted to like do like all these crazy builds that you had to be like like explicitly careful on like how to achieve them when it came to like the skill trees and such. Don't expect anything like that, okay? It's not that in depth. It's just more on the simpler side that kind of is as close to a Souls-like, but still different enough that you can be able to have a different gameplay experience, whichever mission that you decide to play on.
Okay, well, I was definitely not expecting that, but I'd be very surprised if that was available.
Path of Exile was already something that like is incredibly intimidating with the skills that you have to allocate. I don't I don't think that you're gonna find that here.
Okay,
No.
good. So I don't need to plan
Much more
out.
forgiving, I promise you.
Yes, and I. Yes, and.
Also, and one last thing, and this is
Mhm.
something that I beg people not to overlook as a very important aspect that I genuinely love Neo for. It's the fact that it has transmog.
Oh,
You
okay,
can
that's
have
nice.
so yeah, exactly. There are certain armor sets in the game that are just so visually appealing. I love them to death, and I love that I can actually make them look like, or rather that I can have a very useful armor set that can look ugly as heck, but give it that coat, that appearance of an armor set that I genuinely enjoy. Or you can mix match like any armor piece that you want and still achieve the look that you want. That is something that I feel like not a lot of people talk about nowadays, just because they're so used to uh, the the armor sets that you would see in Elden Ring or in any of the Dark Souls or Soulsborns. That what you have is what you have, and you have to work around either the stats or you have to not care about the stats and just get good, just to be able to achieve some kind of fashion souls. I never liked that, so I'm just saying.
I mean, as a Final Fantasy XIV player, I hope that there can be some amount of fashion involved.
There is, but when it comes to Souls likes, you have to sacrifice the stats in order to achieve the look. You don't have to worry about that seemingly at all when it comes to Neo, and I am so infinitely grateful for it. I want to look badass when I fight monsters. Thank you very much.
All right, well, good to know.
What would your next game on the list be?
So, next game. This definitely falls under the category of a game that you like. So, here's another one.
Okay.
So, you already know I am not a big fan of the horror genre. And that's because I just don't find a lot of horror games to be scary. In fact, I would even say that horror these days is done incorrectly, especially in films where it seems like it is far, far, far too often too reliant on jump scares, and that's it. For me, horror comes from the atmosphere. Probably the only horror game that I genuinely really like is Welcome to the Game. But I am actually going to recommend specifically Welcome to the Game 2, as that's the one I'm actually more familiar with. So, Welcome to the Game and its sequel, Welcome to the Game 2, it is all about navigating the dark web. I would say in Welcome to the Game 1, it's kind of weird. In fact, it's very vague as to why you're navigating the dark web. Welcome to the Game 2, it turns out you are playing as a detective, a private detective, and you are trying to find the kidnapped suspect through the dark web. Because it turns out through a wrong click, that's why she went missing. So, in navigating the dark web, you see some very, very awful websites. They're not real. In fact, well, or at least I hope they're not real. And it shows you the very illegal businesses that some people make a living off of. Some websites are just very, very weird. Think of some very deranged fetishes that are not work appropriate or YouTube appropriate. And you have to navigate all of this while avoiding hackers, the police, and even a hitman that someone on the dark web sent after you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you in some kind of hell or limbo?
Yeah, it's called life.
No, I was more so hoping that it would have been some kind of hellish simulator, or perhaps some kind of you're stuck in a horrible realm. No, that's what makes it all the worse.
Yes,
This is a simulation of, like,
humanity at its worst.
yeah. And I the more you were describing how you do not like get scared of, like, horror games in general, which honestly is definitely the reason for why, at the very least, at least I don't believe that any of the entries on my list to recommend to you are quote unquote horror. Um, but as soon as you started describing like this game more and more, I had a feeling you were gonna go straight into this one because you've mentioned it at least a couple of times before, but not quite to the degree that you have like right now. Like, I think that I think that the details that you mentioned about how you have to not only navigate the dark web to, like, search for clues on the person that got kidnapped, but you also have to avoid the freaking police, and you have to avoid a damn hitman that is hired to come after you. You are navigating so many obstacles on the dark web while trying to find and potentially save a life. That is scary. And that is definitely horror. Not a supernatural or paranormal or even science fiction kind of a horror. No, that's just something that is horrific because it sounds really close to what you would kind of expect the dark side of humanity to essentially present. So I can definitely see where you're coming from when it comes to like the whole atmosphere being the most important when it comes to horror games.
Oh yeah. Well, to add to the atmosphere, what Welcome to the Game does, both number one and number two, I think this is absolutely genius. The game, 99% of the time, is dead silent. The moment you hear any small noise, you are immediately kind of set off because you're kind of just used to it just being dead quiet. In fact, there's actually some websites you visit, it will play a sound effect, and it's meant to just catch you off guard, and well, maybe that's this game's version of a jump scare.
I kind of wasn't expecting that, honestly. But to just, like, set the tone for that.
Well, this also goes into my criticism with why I think horror is just done not right anymore, whether it be video games or cinema. It's because when the jump scare is going to happen, usually there's music that comes with it, and it slowly builds up towards that jump scare. It's like, okay, I'm sorry. The moment I hear the violins or whatever instrument, I already know what's gonna happen. But here in Welcome to the Game, it's dead quiet. You hear something like a knock on the door, but it's not actually at the door. It's just this website that's playing mind games with you.
It's so trippy. It's scary as heck and it's trippy as heck too. Oh my goodness.
I mean, this goes for like a lot of things, games, movies, and whatnot. To go into something blind and just experience it raw, having no knowledge. But I especially recommend it for Welcome to the Game. The less you know, I would say like the more jaw dropping it is.
The less you know, the better.
Oh yeah.
Well, at the very least, the details that you've mentioned, I am going to keep that in mind. But I am perfectly comfortable. I'm perfectly all right with you not mentioning like anything beyond like that particular scope. But if this is a game that you really want me to try out, congratulations, dude. You've already made my skin crawl by your description alone. I can only imagine what it's going to be like if I actually if and when I get to the actual game.
I will consider that an accomplishment. Oh, and also, one more in detail. This is actually very important. This game is on PC, and I think it will be PC exclusive because you need a mouse and keyboard to actually, navigate the dark web for this game. And
Of course.
and a fun detail is this game has actual internet access because I was watching streamers play this game, and they literally pulled up twitch.tv literally in the game, and yes, it was actually twitch.tv. Whatever live streams and YouTube videos you could find, yeah, they were also in the actual game.
Okay, that's just freaking scary, dude. Are you sure this game is not actually monitoring you and you're not playing this game? This game is just straight up playing you, personified?
I hope not.
Yeah, me too. I hope not. I'm gonna knock on wood 3 times. There we go. Jesus.
Shall we knock on by to your next recommendation?
Yes. My number 3. You'll feel quite accomplished when you hear this one. I'm gonna give you just a very quick moment to kind of like lock in your choice as to which one of your predictions is correct.
And I am now going to predict you are going to say Bayonetta.
Ha! No.
Darn.
It was one of the titles that I was very, very much heavily debating putting on this list. But ultimately, I decided not to because I saw it was on your wish list anyway. So I was like, you're going to play it at some point. I know you're either going to become invested in it or you're probably just going to write it off being like, yeah, it's whatever. I'm hoping that when like whenever you get around to playing it, you'll actually find it as much fun as I did. But no, I felt like that was a game that I didn't need to put on my games to recommend to you. It's another one. And this one is Dragon Age Origins.
Okay. Well, I got at least one prediction down.
Yes, you did. I'm very proud of you. So very proud of you. So I feel kind of bad for effectively saying that Dragon Age Origins is now, thanks to the release of Dragon Age The Veilguard, now considered to be the peak of the series. Like, Dragon Age Origins was literally the start of the dark fantasy that BioWare managed to go ahead and create this game, this world that was just so visceral. It was just so incredibly miserable in terms of like the dangers that these people had to face either on a daily basis or just catastrophic events that happen like once in a while or something. Like they created just such an incredibly immersive but dark world that it kind of felt like none of the other games in the series were able to live up to that potential. Not even be able to like and not even just like live up to it, they couldn't like surpass it either. We had hoped that, with Dragon Age 2, or at the very least with Dragon Age Inquisition, that the accessibility and gameplay combined with the dark tones that Origins had presented us would have at the very least created like an experience that would have been like the absolute top tier. But then when Veilguard came out, it became just an incredibly divisive and overall like completely average or even below average experience, and certainly not what the fan base had been looking for. Which is why when I say to try out like Dragon Age Origins, I want you to go into it to see where BioWare started with this series because it is a gem. And to kind of like preface this, I got into the Dragon Age series based off of something of a recommendation. A friend of mine really wanted me to get into Inquisition, like straight off the bat. into the third game in the series. But when I found out that that game was the culmination of the events of like the first two games, I immediately thought, okay, I'm not jumping overboard and just going like diving straight into a game that is supposed to be the culmination of the entire story to this point. I'm going to start at the very beginning. And I'm incredibly glad that I did because like this was a gameplay experience that I was not used to at all. Like there were sort of I don't know how to quite describe like the combat itself. It's kind of like a mixture of like what you would kind of see with like, Final Fantasy like 14 where, certain actions like have like a little bit of a timer on them and then you have to wait to use it again, or you can switch over to another action to just kind of like keep the combat going, but it's not turn-based. I'm not sure how exactly you describe that kind of combat. Like, was there a particular term for that? Because I feel like FF14 is probably the closest to the actual like combat system that I can really think of in mind.
I don't remember the exact name for it, but I know what you're talking about. It's
Yeah,
where your abilities are on a cooldown after you use them.
yeah, exactly. And when I first got into Dragon Age Origins, I was completely confused on how this stuff was meant to, play out. It took quite a lot of time for me because this was a new genre that I had not been exposed to, that I had never really played. But even after I was able to like work that combat through, I was able to understand it a little bit more and I was able to more so get into the whole mechanics of like, okay, if you level up like, certain stats, whether it be like persuasion, charisma, or intimidation or whatever, you're able to like change the outcome of like certain like character interactions. Like that entire kind of gameplay system is new to me, but when I got used to it, it really was another one of those experiences that like opened my mind to what other kind of gaming experiences I was able to see. And just the simple fact that at the very least, like this is a gameplay system that is closely familiar to what you and I are kind of like, or what we're currently actively playing with FF14. At the very least, I know you're not going to be lost there. And I already know that the whole, uh, like mechanic of leveling up certain social stats to achieve certain outcomes in conversations or in even like initiating combat experience or combat uh, encounters. I knew that you were going to be at least at ease when it comes to that. It's more so introducing you to just the beginning of this franchise, seeing where Dragon Age came from, that I wanted to recommend you to this game. And to be perfectly honest, even if you decided to like just play Dragon Age Origins and then like effectively never touch the rest of the games, like not number two, not Inquisition, not even Veilguard, I think that you would be perfectly fine just because the way that the game ends, I could see you treating it as like just a one and done experience. Just that first game and then don't think about the rest of the series.
Okay, I can definitely see that.
Because I do feel like, as somebody who has played like I'm trying my best to like stay away from thoughts of like ever playing the Veilguard because I've already read up on some details about how BioWare executed like more of the outcomes of certain plot lines that had been left unresolved or how they added to the lore of their overall universe within Dragon Age. I already know I'm disappointed by it. I don't want to touch it, but I do want you to see where the series came from and why the community almost unanimously agrees, because I imagine that there's probably like a few people that don't really enjoy Origins as much, but either unanimously or almost unanimously agrees that Origins is the peak and BioWare was not able to recapture that magic that they had created with this first game. It was an experience, a very defining gaming experience for a lot of people. And I think it would benefit you to see where it all came from not just the gameplay, but also the story, the characters that you meet, the music, dear God, the music, and just this world, honestly. I would like you to try to experience it for yourself, even if it's just one playthrough from you playing as either a noble human, an elf that was either raised in like the city or raised out in the wilds, or a dwarf. It doesn't matter. Like whichever background character like or origin you decide to use, even just the one like playthrough is enough to make an impression. It certainly was for me. Most likely it'll end up being the same thing for you.
Oh, I don't doubt that. Not at all.
Do you have any like, I don't know, perhaps any like lingering thoughts or like questions as to like origins? Or is it like you pretty much covered like all bases on like what I could potentially expect from it?
I have a question. Can I borrow your copy?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Because I do not want to have to install freaking EA's launcher just to play this game.
Oh yeah, because it is available digitally, correct? But you have to have that EA Origins account. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, you don't need that here.
yeah. That's the only thing stopping me from buying the digital version. And that's through Steam, by the way. Even through Steam, I'm
I
still required to have the EA launcher and whatnot.
That's so freaking dumb, dude. Come on. No, I promise you, I still have a good working PS3. You still have yours. I'll let you like borrow the disc so that you can be able to play through it for yourself.
Nice. Are we good to move on to the next recommendation?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. Tell me, what's the next one?
So, this is one I'm surprised you did not predict, given your Instagram feed for a while now. And that is a Pokemon game. And to be fair, even I was struggling to figure out okay, which Pokemon game should you start out with? And if you had enjoyed it enough, how should you go afterwards? So after a while, I think a good starting point is Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, which is the Game Boy Advance remakes of the original Red and Blue. You would be starting in the Kanto region with the iconic three starters of Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle.
Already, I have a huge smile on my face.
Oh, good. So, it's very strange I recommend this because I would say it's not that I don't like Fire Red and Leaf Green. One of the important aspects to any of the Pokemon games is the region. And I'm actually not a big fan of the Kanto region, specifically how you are supposed to navigate it. There's a lot of artificial barriers, or I say artificial, but that's because here's like a pathway leading to a city. It's like a short walk, but for some reason there is like roadblock A or B in your way, and it's forcing you to go somewhere else. It's forcing you to take the long way around. That's the reason why I personally don't like the Kanto region. But I'm ultimately recommending you start with Fire Red Leaf Green, the Kanto region, in hopes that you become invested enough so that you can continue playing the games afterwards. Because after Fire Red and Leaf Green, I would then say Pokemon Emerald, which is the definitive Ruby and Sapphire, and it's still part of Generation 3, so you would still be familiar with all the um, mechanics that were in Generation 3. And as at this point, I'm just like creating an entire roadmap for you. And at this point, I'm kind of recommending more than just Fire Red and Leaf Green. So we go from Fire Red Leaf Green to Emerald, and then we move on to Gen 4 with Pokemon Platinum, which adds some very much needed upgrades that were sadly missing from Generation 3. Then we can get into Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which are the remakes of the original Gold and Silver. And I don't think I actually mentioned this in our 25 games when I was talking about Heart Gold Soul Silver. But Heart Gold Soul Silver, yes, they are faithful remakes of the original Gold and Silver, but they are remakes that are so good that there's almost no reason to go back to the original Gold and Silver other than for just nostalgia.
I swear you mentioned that to me once. Only once though. But the fact that you emphasized that to me stuck with me. So I wasn't I genuinely forgot like which one of the Pokemon games it was that you said that like it's such a good remake that like you have no reason to go back to the original one. But that particular detail stuck with me and admittedly got me insanely curious for it.
Yeah, and I say this because even back when the 3DS had a functioning eShop, because those services are shut down now. They
Mhm.
eventually added the original Gold, Silver, and even Crystal to that eShop. And yeah, I bought one of them. I think I actually bought Crystal for the 3DS. And yeah, it was purely for nostalgia. It's not because I think that those versions are better than their remakes.
Just nostalgia.
And then after Generation 4's Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, we move on to Generation 5 with the, in retrospect, the very much peak of the series with Black and White and Black 2, White 2. But this entire roadmap hinges on if you enjoyed the original, what I'm recommending, the original Fire Red and Leaf Green. Because I want to start, if anything, I want you to start small. I want you to start with the original 150 Pokemon. Because I feel like if I recommend that you start with like either Platinum or Black and White and you then move backwards, getting familiar with the Pokemon itself themselves, it's gonna be kind of jarring. Because there are actually some Pokemon that don't get any like new evolutions or new moves until these later generations, until like Gen 4 and 5. So this is why I think starting in Generation 3, it's a good starting point.
I gotcha. And I love that you have an entire roadmap planned out for me if I decide that I genuinely want to go ahead and, move on beyond your recommendation for Pokemon Fire and Leaf Green. Like, I love your dedication for that. I really do. And I I will say the only real reason for why I never went ahead and explored any more of the Pokemon games, despite the fact that I do remember, I can't remember like which game in the series it was specifically, but I was exposed to the Game Boy versions at one point with my uncle and his library of video games that just effectively got me into a lot of series that I hold near and dear to my heart right now. But I think that the biggest reason for why I didn't go any further with it was because of the whole mechanic of the damn random encounters. Like I'm just walking through a freaking patch of grass, a single patch of grass in front of me, and boom, I'm being attacked
By a
by a
rat.
bird. A rat or a bird, I'm not sure one of them. I'm pretty sure it was a bird, but some random animal decided to go ahead and start a fight with me. All I'm doing is walking to a town. That's it.
And yet I reintroduced you random encounters through Final Fantasy IX.
Yeah, but I was a lot more open-minded to like actually try, something new, to actually try turn-based combat. Back then, I was a lot more like incredibly simple. I was like, getting into like the very, very like OG Medal of Honor Call of Duties, and then I was moving on into like more advanced games like freaking uh, PsyOps and uh Splashdown. Like I'm just gonna be listing like a whole bunch of like, really nostalgic PS1 and PS2 games that I played. Like my gaming taste was not quite as expansive as it it was when I was in high school or even as it is now. I'm not that worried as to whether or not like I'm gonna end up like having a difficult time getting into Pokemon. It's more so like, okay, how am I gonna know which objectives to do? Like, how do I advance from point A to point B? Heck, how do I even find out what is point A and what is my objective? My next one. That's what I'm a little bit more worried about, but I think that once I actually get into it, I'll be able to figure it out. If not, I suppose if you're willing, I could always ask you for help. So that way I'm not lost in my experience getting into Pokemon.
Oh no, definitely. Especially since,
Okay, good.
especially with every few games, they tend to add new methods to evolving Pokemon, in which some of them get really freaking dumb.
Something about taking them to a very specific rock, I think you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
That was like which evolution was that?
That was Leafeon and Glaceon and Generation 4. Honestly, those are actually pretty tame by comparison.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Seriously tame. No, I'm worried.
the one I can think of is Generation 6 X and Y. One of the Pokemon you legit evolve by holding your 3DS upside down.
What the heck on?
Yeah, they get pretty ridiculous.
Ay ay ay.
I honestly think all you need to play is Generation 3 through 5. Everything else is just optional. But I will say, here's a fun idea.
Right?
If my memory is correct, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow have very, very bad Spanish translations. I am
Oh
curious. I
no.
would love to for you to stream one of those versions and give Twitch chat a listen on how to not speak Spanish.
Oh no. I where do you come up with these ideas? It's so, oh my god, it's so ridiculously funny. I want to try that now.
Okay, good. I wanna see this.
Oh, you know what? Screw it. Bring it on. Please, bring it on. I want to see this so badly now. Thanks for the idea.
You're welcome. That is one to write on a post-it note and just pin it. Okay. So then your next recommendation.
My next one at number 4. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I don't remember if this was already on your list of games that you were going to try out anyways, or whether or not you were probably reluctant to just to see like where a series went, and also just to see whether or not it is as bad or divisive as people say it is. But this was one of those entries on my list that like the more I thought about, the more I was like, I actually kind of want to try to make something of a case for people to play this, like yourself included. And that is, I'm a little bit nervous to say this, but that is the Devil May Cry reboot.
Hmm.
Your expression says it all.
So here's the thing. I never finished Devil May Cry 3
Mm-hmm.
because my fingers hurt playing that game. Will I break my fingers playing DMC? Devil May Cry?
No.
Okay, good. Because part of me,
Okay,
part of
okay,
me,
go ahead, go ahead.
part of me has been telling myself, okay, let's go back to Devil May Cry 3 and actually finish it. Because I still got Devil May Cry 4 and 5 in my Steam library. In fact, I even have DMC Devil May Cry in my Steam library. I might as well give that one a shot. Because I know in our past discussions in private, you've said that combat is actually, it is still good in the reboot, and you have far more control of the camera compared to the mainline series,
Mm-hmm.
which was already kind of selling me the game, just because I really did not like the fixed camera angle in DMC one.
I definitely do not remember it to be as bad as in DMC1 as it would have been in, like, the reboot. My biggest concern was, like, getting you to kind of look past the stigma that this game has on, or rather that the community has essentially placed upon this game simply because it is a reboot. I'm pretty sure you remember, when this game came out, the amount of discourse that the mere existence of this game being a reboot has effectively caused on the internet. There was even, I can't remember if it was a joke. Honestly, at this point, I'm kind of questioning if it was even real or not in the first place. But at some point, people were so pissed off that this existed that they were actively campaigning for President Barack Obama at the time to remove it from stores.
I don't know if I want to laugh or just facepalm at the idea of that.
I would do a combination of both.
It's one of those ideas is it that is so ridiculous. It's funny, but it's so ridiculous to where I say, you really think Obama cared about video games?
Despite the number of memes that effectively paint him as somebody who does enjoy video games, yeah, I don't think so. But like when I say that this game is like more accessible, I do mean it. And I honestly didn't even realize it at the time, but apparently the combat designer for this game, he commented about like, how people who were trying to get into the Devil May Cry series just had like a bunch of, difficulty trying to understand like all of like the advanced combo move sets that, that you could be able to perform like, multiple combos at once that then, like put possibly transition into like other weapons, but they had to be so precise and perfectly executed. It was almost like as if you were playing a fighting game. But not that many people were able to like actually get into it. So what the combat designer for this game effectively wanted was that she designed for just the overall gameplay to be able to appeal to newcomers to this series whilst being able to maintain their ability to actually perform like, these incredibly elaborate, combos and still being able to offer that same gameplay experience that the OG Devil May Cry games were able to, offer up that even experienced players could be able to enjoy. And honestly, from both the fans and the critics' perspective, I don't think anybody ever said anything negative about the combat, which is something that I think is probably surprising. Because if there's at least one aspect to this game that almost everybody universally agrees is that a reboot did not need to happen at all, but to see that that a lot of people were able to at least come together to agree that yeah, the combat was actually a lot of fun and quite possibly way more fluid than any of the previous games in the series had given to us. Even Devil May Cry 4, which at the time was the latest entry. And then like 5 years later we would end up getting the reboot. I can't entirely speak to why Capcom effectively thought that having a reboot was a good idea. Maybe they didn't see like enough sales numbers for Devil May Cry 4. Maybe they thought that if they gave like a new facelift to the series, it would bring more people over to this franchise. And it kind of did, but in a very negative manner, and certainly not the positive one that they had initially hoped for. But looking back on it, it's not as bad as people claim it to be. The only possible negatives that maybe people could like actively like legitimately stand on is just the way that Dante himself is portrayed, because keep in mind, you can kind of treat this as a little bit like Devil May Cry 3, to where he is kind of barely starting to find a footing as to like what he wants to do with his life. Does he actually want to like, become a devil hunter? Does he just want to do this like, for fun? Is it like what exactly is his calling? This reboot is meant to be even before that. Like he doesn't know what he wants to do. He's just going through life however he knows how to. And the story, for all intents and purposes, is a pretty natural progression from him being just incredibly carefree to him finally having a purpose and discovering more of his powers and realizing what he can do. So kind of getting him to the point where he kind of leaves off in Devil May Cry 3. And the story, it's not revolutionary or anything. It's like, pretty basic. And the characters, some new and some are, reiterations. They're not bad. And the music is actually pretty good. I listen to it like, maybe every so often. I think that the biggest thing that Devil May Cry Reboot has over the mainline games is just how much more fluid the combat is. It genuinely flows more like water. And I would kind of associate it almost to the same degree as what I would describe Bayonetta's combat as. Why I enjoy Platinum Games is, like fluidity with combat encounters way more than I ever have with even the Devil May Cry series. And somehow the reboot manages to kind of capture that. I'm pretty sure they cited Platinum Games as either like hoping to kind of rival their style of gameplay for the combat specifically, or they were hoping to at least live up to it because they knew how accessible that gameplay style was. Either way, we still ended up getting an experience that was incredibly fluid and, generally speaking, enjoyable to play. And I don't think that your fingers are going to end up hurting when you play this game.
If I remember correctly, I believe Clover Studios, who were the makers of Okami and would eventually become Platinum Games.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it very, very ironic that a bunch of former Capcom employees, or at least a studio under Capcom, made a game that kind of made Capcom themselves shaking their boots.
I don't think that this was developed by Capcom. I do think that they asked another studio to develop it.
The reboot?
Ninja Theory. Yes. So Ninja Theory, I believe they were at the time uh the people that made Heavenly Sword. I think they're the current people that are currently doing Senua's Sacrifice, Hellblade, that series.
I believe you are correct.
Yeah, it's just that like the more I was reading up on this game, the more I was rather surprised to see that Capcom, they actually went ahead and approached Ninja Theory because they were impressed by their work with Heavenly Sword. And they decided that, okay, this is a studio that kind of, either not kind of, but like it gets it with the combat. We want to give them a shot to actually develop the reboot. Honestly, I think that what they ended up giving us, pretty all right. Like if I had to give it like a numerical score, I would say it's like a 7 at the absolute lowest, and then it's a solid 8. A solid 8 out of 10 for sure. It's not a point off to being perfect, and it's certainly not perfect, but it is not nearly as horrendous as a lot of people have effectively claimed and kind of stuck to their guns to, like over the course of the years. Like now it's been like what, like 12 years since the game came out. I don't think I've ever thought that low of it. I thought it was unnecessary for it to exist in the first place because like we didn't want a reboot. We wanted a straight up continuation of Devil May Cry 4, which we didn't end up getting until what was it, 2019? The Devil May Cry 5?
Yeah, many years later.
Like 11 years later, because DMC4 released back in 2008. So I don't entirely know whether the community has kind of like changed its thoughts as to whether or not this game is good or bad, but I have been seeing like more people online saying that like yeah, the gameplay is actually fantastic and a lot more accessible than of the traditional DMC series that we've gotten. This is one of those titles that I would say like yes, just give it a try. Actually play it for yourself. Come to the conclusion for yourself instead of relying on online opinions to essentially tell you to either that mostly tell you to just stay away from the game because it adds nothing to the series. And I'm not necessarily hoping that this is something that Capcom prioritizes, but I do see the potential for there being a sequel to this reboot because it's there. The potential is absolutely there. Whether or not they want to, that's completely up to them. If they don't want to, that's perfectly fine. But I can see it happening if they want to go ahead and give it a shot. Most likely not going to end up happening though.
Well, after the success of Devil May Cry 5, yeah. Overall, I would say I am not against. I'm not against trying it out. It's just that mentally, I know I would want to go back and actually finish Devil May Cry 3.
No, I don't blame you for it. Like I honestly I played through Devil May Cry's 1 through 4 before actually trying out the reboot. Because then I had a proper mindset to like be able to like compare and contrast to see, okay, what did the reboot do right? What did it do wrong? And just kind of being able to have like a little bit of a, not a benchmark per se, but just the kind of like the standard that I would have hoped that the combat would be for the Devil May Cry games. Because let's be real, Devil May Cry, we don't come to the series for the story. We come for the characters and we come for the combat and the music that accompanies it. And I think that at the very least, for the most part, the reboot definitely accomplishes that. I found it a very enjoyable experience. I think that uh, if you decide to go ahead and give it a shot, at the very least, you'll kind of be likely come to at least the same conclusions that I have.
Yeah, I don't doubt that.
And again, don't worry. I'm pretty sure that your fingers will be just fine. You'll be okay.
Okay, good, because I need those. Are we good to move on to my final recommendation?
Yes. Yes, we are.
My final recommendation for you. Congratulations. It was your very first prediction.
No.
Yes. The
No.
Yep.
Oh my god.
I would say out of these 5 recommendations that I've listed out for you, this is the one that I absolutely want to see from you on stream.
Oh my god.
Xenoblade.
Oh my gosh. Wait, does that kind of sort of mean I was able to predict almost 2 of your list?
Almost, yes.
Yay! I'm so happy. Which Xenoblade though?
In my heart, I really want to recommend Xenoblade 1. But here's the weird part. So you know that I recently finished Xenoblade 2. And
Mhm.
I have some criticisms about it. But what I noticed online is that the people who really, really love Xenoblade 2, that was their first Xenoblade. That was their introduction to
No.
that was their introduction to the series.
No.
So me coming from 1 to 2, yeah, I mean it makes sense for me to compare it to Xenoblade 1. And I thought Xenoblade 1 is great. It's one of my favorite games ever. So when you have a new wave of players coming in and they are introduced to the shiny new Nintendo Switch, and on it, Xenoblade 2, it makes sense that they would enjoy it a lot because they don't have that prior exposure that I do. And here you are, you're in this very weird situation where yeah, you have not touched any of these games yet. But through my word of mouth, I'm already kind of creating this influence of don't get your hopes up for Xenoblade 2. Just start with 1 and we'll see what you think of Xenoblade 2. But realistically, I think you might just end up having the same experience that I did. And I don't think that's fair to Xenoblade 2. So to reiterate what I was saying, in my heart, yes, I really want to recommend specifically Xenoblade 1. But I have to acknowledge that based on observation, I think doing that might actually damage your experience with Xenoblade 2.
I see where you're going with it. Bit odd, but I do see where you're going with it though. Because here's the thing. I'm most like whenever I'm trying to get into a series, I usually just play like legitimately from games that were like start, like literally the start of the series to where it is now. So if I were to have done that, just so that I can be able to kind of like experience the series, not necessarily properly, but in the way that it was released, the consequence of it, you're saying, is that I would have a lower opinion of number two,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the high bar that number one set.
That's partially it.
What's the rest of it?
So Xenoblade 1 is it's pretty focused. In terms of the main story, yeah, it is focused. There's not too much like distractions and all this wackiness because Xenoblade 2 gets criticized for being quote unquote too anime, which it's at this point I will admit it's overused so much I don't think people actually know what they even mean by that. But I will go ahead and actually try to explain it from my perspective. Xenoblade 2 being too anime is where you see a lot of tropes from, of course, the anime genre. You have a relatively young cast of characters. Our protagonist is an overly optimistic goof who can be compared to like someone like Luffy from One Piece. You have tsunderes. You have sexual innuendos played for comic relief.
Oh dear.
You even have a bit of a Team Rocket gag going on for one of the characters.
Oh jeez.
And all of this goofiness is set in a world where there's like legit consequences. Because Xenoblade 2, I might have already said this to you in a previous discussion. Xenoblade 2's premise, in terms of its world, is that the world is literally dying. The world consists of continents, countries. They are literally on the backs of living creatures, and these living creatures are dying. And when they die, you have entire civilizations wiped out, and whatever survivors there are, they have to immigrate onto a new Titan, a new living continent. And this is creating an influx in immigration, it's creating a lot of political turmoil, resources are running low, some nations are on the verge of declaring war, and in all of that, we're getting tsunderes and boob jokes. Why? Why?
Seems like a pretty far cry from the focused storytelling of Xenoblade 1.
This is a perspective of a Xenoblade 1 player coming into Xenoblade 2.
And you think that if I do not play the first game, that overall viewpoint is going to be lessened simply because I have not played the first one. So I'll be able to enjoy it a bit more, or at least not have that much of a mindset toward it.
Possibly. Possibly. If I could, I would actually like to do this as like kind of like a social study, I guess. I am curious to know, for the group of people who find Xenoblade 2 to be like this life-changing experience, like how Persona 3 was for me as a teenager, I'm curious to know, for those Xenoblade 2 fans, how old were you? Because you and I, we're old. We're almost pushing 500 years old. And through our life experience and wisdom, there's still a chance that even if you do start with Xenoblade 2, that you might still come out with a similar opinion that I do. But at the same time, maybe I am overanalyzing all of this.
You won't know until I actually get my hands on it and start playing it.
Yes. Regardless if you start with 1 or 2, the end goal is Xenoblade 3.
I'll tell you what,
Go ahead.
we could try to do this as a kind of a social experiment to see whether or not I'll have a slightly different opinion or maybe the same opinion as you if I start off with Xenoblade 2. This will probably be like the first time I I want to say like the first time in over a decade where I start the series off not at the beginning, not even in chronological order, but just going straight into the middle with number 2 and then number 1 and then ultimately the goal being getting straight into Xenoblade 3 after all that. I'll do it just because I'm curious for this little potential social experiment of yours to see how my opinion goes if I play the second game first. Gonna be a little bit of a weird experience for me just because I usually like to start at the beginning of the series and then work my way down where it's at now, like literally playing the games in order of release because I like to see how like the series has progressed. That's just, like my personal play style. I'll go ahead and break that trend, or at the very least this game.
But just as a reminder, you did not start with Final Fantasy 1.
To be fair, I didn't know anything about Final Fantasy. I wasn't even sure if I should even play it at all. I had been exposed to the series before. You just so happened to be the person to recommend me a starting point that would be a little bit more easily digestible. And voila, it ended up being one of the absolute most influential game recommendations of my life, if not to this day, still the top. So I'll still go ahead and do it. Hey, at least it's not going to be as weird as my brother recommending me to start off with Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah, no,
So,
that's a bad
yeah.
recommendation.
But yeah, that's a little bit of a trivia for me, guys. Yeah, I did start off with MGS at the very end of the series, chronologically speaking. I had no idea what was going on.
All because of a questionable recommendation.
Yeah, but at least now that I know where I kind of came from, I can kind of like make a little bit of fun on it, but also kind of see like the progression of it. It's like, oh my God, why did I start with the last game? Why didn't I start with like the proper chronological order to see this incredible progression of an iconic series? But if I ever get to that, I'll let you know how it goes. But for this one, sure, I'll go ahead and start with number 2, and then 1, and then 3 for Xenoblade.
Good thing I owned all of them.
Yes.
Go ahead, hype me up. What's your final recommendation for me?
I don't know if this is one that's gonna end up catching you off guard or if this is one that's just gonna be like, huh, to you. But this, I would classify this a little bit more into I like this game and I hope you will understand why. And that would be Dark Souls 2.
Interesting. Very interesting. As someone who knows not a whole lot about the Soul series, If I know anything about the Soul series, it's that Bloodborne is pretty freaking good. That's the end of it. Well, actually, if there's anything I know about the Soul series, it's this other thing that Dark Souls 2 is very divisive. Funnily enough, in my YouTube feed, I didn't get to watch it because I was distracted with watching other videos. In my YouTube feed, there was a video. It was titled Dark Souls 2 is okay. It's the Scholarship of Sin edition that's problematic. Maybe you can clarify if there's any truth to that.
The thing is I haven't had the chance to actually play its OG version that was on the PS3. I have access to it, and I am gonna get around to actually playing it. Um, but I do know that there was, I want to say it was a gameplay mechanic. I'm not entirely sure if it was something to do with either adaptability or if it was being able to like there was a very specific kind of weapon in the game that for whatever reason moving forward the series never tried to kind of like give you access to like actually replicate using this like two-handed weapons, I believe. It was kind of controversial to see that change from from number 2 to number 3 and so on and so forth within the series, but I think that was it. I can't really tell you very much off the top of my head like why the first version of the game is, I guess, better in the eyes of this one person, but I can tell you that Scholar of the First Sin actually gives more context to the lore of Dark Souls 2 because you are actually exploring the meaning of the title, Scholar of the First Sin. The first sin being the central theme of the entire Souls series. That actually kind of nicely transitions into why I think not a whole lot of people actually appreciate Dark Souls 2 very much, and that is its story. It is very surprising upon a replay for me to actually find out more and more details as to how this game is actually managed to answer questions regarding the overall reason for the entire world of the series to exist. To answer questions about, like where hollows came from, the cycle of fire, and, the like I don't want to get too into it, but it actually does provide answers that upon a first playthrough would be incredibly cryptic, but when you actually play through it even just like a second time, it clicks for you. The fact that there is an active NPC within the game that I don't believe was present at all in the first game, in the first iteration of Dark Souls 2, to effectively tell you whether it be, like in his own straightforward manner or whether you interpret it as cryptic. But the fact of the matter is, Dark Souls 2 holds a lot of answers to this series. It puts so much into perspective, but people end up overlooking it because of the gameplay, because of the fact that this is the game that was developed by the B team and not by the main team over at FromSoft.
In
If
retrospective, what was the change that made this game so hated that everyone just went back to Dark Souls 1?
if I had to pick at least one single aspect to Dark Souls 2 that divided everybody on this, it is the inclusion of an attribute called adaptability. So you know how in the Souls games, the existence of iframes, right?
Yes.
That mere existence was not ever messed around with in Numbers 1, in Bloodborne, in Dark Souls 3, or even in Elden Ring. It was never touched upon. It was just something that simply existed. You got good at, playing the game, you were able to, take advantage of it, or if you got lucky, you were still able to take, proper advantage of it. In Dark Souls 2, iframes were affected by an attribute. And if you did not level up that attribute, you were in a world of hurt. You would be subjected to a lot of attacks that you swear you could have been able, or rather, you should have been able to dodge. Like you were, like a lot of people would say like, "Oh my god, I should have dodged that," or "It should not have hit me," and so on and so forth. It's like, yes, I see the gameplay of it. You did dodge with correct timing, but the attack still hit. And the biggest reason for that is really because you did not level up your adaptability. I cannot tell you how much that ended up affecting my very first playthrough. Like my first playthrough was like I forced myself to go ahead and complete it because I was just that stubborn to see from start to finish what Dark Souls 2 was all about. I wanted to see how divisive it was. And I ended up understanding why it was so divisive. Because even things such as, like the new introduction of like these healing items, these life gems that if you like, crushed one, it would slowly heal your health bar like over a very small period of time and not even heal as much. Like it's a very slow healing for not a whole lot in return. So you had to like actively consume them multiple at a time just so that you could be able to have like a proper time to like for your health meter to heal up quickly enough as well as for like the animations to even crush the damn things to actually play out. And interestingly enough, that was also a factor that adaptability seemed to affect as well. Like this one single attribute affected so much to my gameplay. And the fact that I did not pay attention to it on my first playthrough, it made my entire experience negative. I hated the inclusion of these little life gems. I hated the fact that my freaking Estus flask and the animation to just consume it was so freaking slow. I hated feeling like the damn hitboxes in the game were just unfair, but it's actually been proven that they're not unfair. They're actually perfectly fair. It's just the freaking adaptability that affects it. Like I literally made a top like 12 reasons why I did not like the game. But once I was effectively educated, not just by my brother, but also like from, like Vextra Life, as well as like other people in the Soulsborne community, as to ways to like kind of make the gaming experience better. Like I actually did even just a tiny bit of research on this stuff. My second playthrough, which was played on stream, I had a much easier time and a much more fun time with it than I thought I could ever have imagined. That's saying something. I went from having an experience that probably I would have ranked it as like a freaking, I don't know, 5, like 4 or 5 out of 10 or something, to one that's easily an 8 or a 9. Like my opinion changed that much once I learned literally just change one aspect of my gameplay and it's as if I freaking see the light or something. Like, oh my god, why the hell did I not do this in my first playthrough? It made me appreciate the game so much more. But even so, and this is something that I will still defend my opinion on, I do not agree with the overall presence of this particular attribute being in the game. I understand that it is in the game. I needed to learn how to adapt myself to it. I needed to also find out like other mechanics that would help me either get specific items or help me farm better or just like make my life a little bit easier as I am playing through this game. But even so, even as I acknowledge that yes, they are available in the game, I am a lot more civil than a lot of people in the community when I say I disagree with its presence, but I don't necessarily think that it is the completely worst gaming experience that I've ever had. Like, I disagree with it, but I'm not going to deny that because I educated myself on it, it actually turned out to be a much better gaming experience than I had thought. I'm not entirely sure whether or not like even Charlie, Moist Critical, had the same opinion, but even like just based off of like the freaking titles of his time playing Dark Souls 2, even he seems to have changed his opinion and enjoyed the game more somehow. I never would have expected him, but like yeah, it turned out to be the case
I have
somehow.
I have two questions.
Hmm.
Number one, if I max out the adaptability stat to 99 or whatever, do I just become a ghost and become immune to all damage?
I think you would be wasting a lot of attribute points just leveling up to 99. You don't need to go that high.
Okay.
Uh, because if you ended up going that high to level 99, what that tells me is either you're spending a lot of time in one playthrough or you are doing multiple like new game pluses or something. Because adaptability, I think that no matter what class you start in, that number is pretty low. From like, I think it was like either levels 8 or 9 to like 13 or 15 or something. I'm not sure. So you'd be spending a lot of levels into that one skill. I don't know if you really want to do that. You could if you want to. You have that freedom if you want to. I personally wouldn't, but I mean, if you want to, go right on ahead. Let me know how that goes.
Alright, my second question is, do you think this is gonna be one of those games that, in retrospect, people are gonna realize it's not as bad as they thought? Is this a DMC Devil May Cry situation? Where not all of it is bad. Okay, people are willing to admit, okay, they were a bit too harsh on the game.
Yes, but here is the reason for why I genuinely think that it's most likely not going to end up happening. People keep regurgitating the same tired negative points over and over and over again to a point where it is easier to believe all of the negative stuff than it is to actually go ahead and play the game for themselves with the advice to make the experience better for them to see, hey, it turns out that this game is actually better than we all give it credit for. It's like it's so much better than all the crap that we threw at it like these past like what 13 to because I think it came out in 2011. Actually, I can't remember exactly when the game first came out, but it was a while ago. Definitely a long, long while ago. Easily a decade, for sure. Easily a decade. But yeah, like I do genuinely think that if people had given it the benefit of the doubt and went ahead and played through the game knowing all of these mechanics are in here to effectively make your play experience a lot more feasible, people are going to end up realizing, oh, are there. It's just a matter of whether or not I took the time to understand them, to actually explore and see where all of this is coming from versus the grand majority of the people that I see online who just love to hate on the game because it is popular to hate on the game. It still is the popular thing to do nowadays instead of giving it a chance and trying it out legitimately. I'm one of the rare people. I'm not sure if rare really is the right word anymore, but I'm one of the people that went ahead, had a very poor playing experience the first time, and once I was told to kind of keep in mind certain mechanics that are available in the game. They didn't disappear. They are there in the game. I had a way, way infinitely better experience my second time around, and thus I had been able to pretty much change my mindset pretty much completely about this game. And I'm thankful for it because I didn't want to continue hating this game. I wanted to try to see if I could give it a second chance, and I ended up doing so. And the reason for why I end up recommending it to you is because I don't want you to fall into that category of people where it's like, oh, I heard that the game was crap. I'm not going to give it any of my time. It's actually good. The story is probably a lot more interesting than any of the other Dark Souls games. And the environments, while it is probably the start of a more or less ish linear experience, though not quite as linear as what you see with Dark Souls 3, the environments, the enemies that you fight, the weapons that you gain access to, some gameplay mechanics that you never see ever from like the series ever again. If you're up for it, apparently the PvP is probably the best experience in Dark Souls 2 than it ever is in any other entry in the series. There are people that die on that hill. I'm not for PvP. I will never ever ever touch PvP ever in my life. I hate it with a passion, but apparently it is the peak experience in number 2.
That is surprising to hear.
Exactly, me too. So, if this kind of like piques your interest a little bit more as to like why uh Dark Souls 2 should be worth your time, I hope, you know, I am able to kind of like pique your interest more with it. To kind of like go back to that previous question as to like, why Scholar of the First Sin is not as good as the previous edition, the only other thing I can think of is just different enemy placement and items. And that's it. If there's anything more that that one person that you told me with the video mentioned, I'll have to look into it, but as far as I can tell, it's just different enemy placement, different item placement, and the inclusion of a new character that actually answers more questions as to the overall state, the overall world, the overall reason for existence that Dark Souls as a universe came to be, which is incredible. Now that I'm able to like actually put it into perspective the from having played all of the Soulsborne games. So that said, do you have any other questions or even concerns regarding this low-key surprise entry for recommendations to you?
So, very much like the DMC reboot, definitely not against the idea, but this does mean perhaps I should go back and finish Dark Souls 1.
I forget the reason for why you end up stopping. I think if I remember correctly, you wanted to focus on other games that you were trying to get videos done for, but
That was one small reason. The other thing was I know people praise what is that, Firelink Shrine? People praise that the world just loops back into Firelink Shrine, into this safe space that you start out in. And I agree, I see the appeal. You see these stairways and mountains and tunnels, and they all loop back to the same area. It was to the point where I kind of wanted the game to just be a walking simulator. I didn't care about fighting enemies. I just wanted to see how the world just continuously led you back to the shrine.
I think you'd only really be able to accomplish that if you're high level enough to where you could just like walk through Undead Burg, go up into Undead Parish and into the catacombs and so on and so forth. Like, it's not that enemies will ignore you if you're high level enough, it's that you wouldn't end up taking that much damage if you just wanted to quote unquote walk the world.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I cannot do that.
It's not a bad idea though. I kind of that almost sounds like a challenge run. Not gonna lie.
And Dark Souls pacifist run.
Oh man. Imagine that. But pacifist specifically for the enemies in the world, not for the bosses.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, buddy, but the bosses gotta go.
Do you want to share our list of nominees or potential nominees, contenders?
Sure, why not?
And we're already 2 hours over, so we don't need to go into any deep explanations, if any.
Well, yeah, I gotcha. There were quite a lot of entries. I'll go ahead and just kind of like do a little bit of rapid fire. Bayonetta was definitely one of them, but I didn't put it on my list because I knew that at some point you wanted to get around to it. It was on your list anyways. I had initially considered Red Dead 2, but once again, like I had a feeling you would want to play it regardless, and I also considered putting in the first Red Dead, specifically that you would play that first and then Red Dead 2. Um, but I think that that would be more so a recommendation that I felt like it didn't necessarily need to be on the list for me to have to recommend to you. At another point, I considered, like maybe Resident Evil 6, but I feel like I kind of might have already made my case for it, like on our top 25 games. Regardless, I talk about it plenty with you and like even private discussions. And I think the very last entry I thought about putting on this list was the Metro 2033 series. But then you showed me that you got that through like a humble bundle. And I thought, okay, he's already got it. I don't think I need to necessarily recommend it to him, but just in case, I do think that, you know, you would genuinely like the game simply because of its UI design, or I guess lack of a UI design, and where the game gets a little bit more creative to show you, your health, your ammo count, your oxygen levels, and so on and so forth. The immersion of it and just the overall presentation of the science fiction world is something that I think you probably would have liked. But other than that, I feel like those were probably like my other uh, recommendations that I don't think needed to be on the list per se. So, what about yours?
Okay. For me, it was Fallout New Vegas, Near Replicant. This one I couldn't remember if you played at all. Near Automata.
Yes, I did, but I need to replay it again because I don't feel like I appreciated it enough on my first playthrough of it.
Okay. And then after that, it was Ocarina of Time and one of the games that inspired Undertale, and that is Earthbound. Oh, and Chrono Trigger.
I had a small feeling you were gonna recommend Earthbound to me. Dang it, I should have said that. Should have gone with my other gut instinct.
Yep, all of those were fighting with Ghost of Tsushima. By the way,
Oh well.
when are you gonna start streaming Ghost of Tsushima? Can you just start now?
You really want me to?
I know it's past our bedtime.
Can I just start now?
I would like to, but we also need to be responsible adults.
Agnabbit life.
Go to bed, wake up for work, pay our taxes.
You've convinced me to get around to it much sooner. I promise you I will. Now, whether or not I decide to do that after Spider-Man, we shall see.
Okay, very quickly,
Hmm?
before we end off, let's recap our recommendations. So, I recommended you Ghost of Tsushima, Card Shop Simulator, Welcome to the Game, Pokemon Fire Red Leaf Green, and Xenoblade.
And I recommended to you Theory, Not Theory, Neo, Dragon Age Origins, the Devil May Cry reboot, and Dark Souls 2.
Alright, well, this means at some point in the future, these will be turned into Twitch streams and YouTube videos. Release date for those projects are to be announced.
Boy, am I excited for them.